So for this lecture we're doing respiratory physiology. To start off, we're going to talk about pulmonary ventilation. And when we're talking about respiratory physiology in the acts of respiration, there's going to be four main things going on. There's going to be pulmonary ventilation. It's going to be bringing air into the lungs. There's going to be external respiration. That's going to be getting gas into the lungs, so exchanging gas from the lungs into the blood. Then there's going to be transportation, so we're transporting gas from the lungs to our tissue. Then there's internal respiration, so the way I remember this is PETI. P-E, do you love my beautiful writing with this mouse here? Sorry guys. P-E-T-I. That is like a 3-year-old's handwriting. A 3-year-old would probably do better. So we have pulmonary ventilation. We're bringing air into the lungs and air out of the lungs. External respiration, we are dumping oxygen into the blood and dumping carbon dioxide into the lungs. We transport those gases to our tissues. Then we drop off the oxygen at our tissues and pick up the carbon dioxide. So pulmonary ventilation, external respiration, transportation, and internal respiration. So with our respiration we're going to have two phases, inspiration and expiration. Inspiration is bringing the air in, expiration is getting the air out of your lungs. In order for these to occur, we are going to have a little bit of an understanding of pressures. So first off, we're going to have our atmospheric pressure, which will be the pressure of the air around us. This is caused by all the air molecules pushing down on us from ground level all the way up until you get out into outer space. There's just more and more and more air pushing down on you. You don't notice it to be very much because it's air, it's light. But if you were to take sand, for example, and you put 1 scoop of sand, there's a little bit of pressure. All of a sudden, if you put a large mountain of sand on your chest, you won't be able to breathe because there's a lot of pressure. So this atmospheric pressure is going to be very, very important in getting air into our lungs. Intrapulmonary pressure, that is going to be the pressure inside of our alveoli. And then we get intrapleural pressure. That's the pressure in our pleural cavity. So here we go. Our atmospheric pressure is the outside world. That will be coming into our trachea, okay, and then into our lungs, and then into our bronchi. Our intrapleural pressure is the pressure in the pleura. So once again, let's talk about our pleural cavity. We'll have our parietal pleura, which is this outer black line, and it folds over itself here to form the visceral pleura, which is the layer on the surface of the organ, which is viscera, which is our lung. Space between them is the pleural cavity, so that's the intrapleural pressure. That pressure is going to be 756. If you notice, it is slightly lower than the pressure inside the lungs. The intrapulmonary pressure is 760. Why is that important? Because stuff wants to go from areas of high pressure to low pressure. So since the air is trying to get out of the lungs, it is keeping the lung blown up. Let's say you stab somebody. Let me get a pointer so we can stab our lung. Let's say we stab this person's lung right here. If you stab that lung, all of a sudden we're letting air pressure in from the outside world. So this would change to 760. If pressure in there and here are the same, then the lung will deflate. When I have a balloon, I blow and I'm forcing air molecules into that balloon and I'm increasing the pressure. So the pressure inside my balloon is higher than the outside world. If I open up the top or poke a hole in it, all of a sudden air pressure equals out because the air wants to go from high pressure to low pressure and it will quickly reach equilibrium. So this lung would collapse. So it's important for us to keep this barrier here. Now, if I want this lung to expand, what I could do is I could increase the size of my chest cavity. It would drop this number 756 to a little bit lower number, and it would cause my lung to expand in volume with it, and then we would get air to flow in to the lung. So With our lungs, if we have changes in pressure, that is going to change if we have changes in volume, that is going to change our pressures, which will get gas to flow. So there's this equation. It's P1V1 equals P2V2. That is Boyle's law. The gist of what it's saying is that gases are going to be the gist of what it's saying is that constant temperature, pressures of gas will vary inversely to its volume. So, if I was to increase the volume of my lung, we would decrease the pressure. If we increase the volume of the lung, we would decrease the pressure of the lung. Why? We need to keep stuff equal from this side of the equation to that side. So let's say my pressure in my lung is 1, my volume in my lung is 1, pressure 2, 1, 1, okay? If we change one of these, let's say I increase my volume here to 2, in order to keep this side of the equation equal to this side of the equation, we'd have to change this to 0.5. So that would give us half. So that would keep our pressures the same. Why is that important? If I increase the volume of this lung, my pressure of my lung drops in proportion to that, and that will drop the pressure in the lung, which means air wants to go from high pressure to low pressure. Atmospheric pressure stays the same, air gets forced into the lung. Okay? So here's what happens. Our inspiratory muscles, such as the diaphragm and the ribs, okay? Your external intercostals will contract, pulling your ribs up and outwards, and your diaphragm will contract. When your diaphragm contracts, it flattens out. If you are breathing properly when you inspire, your belly bulges out. You get a pooch in your belly. Why? You're forcing your diaphragm to flatten out. You're sticking out your abdominal organs, and it increases the volume inside your thoracic cavity, which causes air to flow in. Okay? So, thoracic volume, so contract those muscles, volume increases, lungs stretch, air flows in, alright, pulmonary pressure drops and the air flows in. Now we have gas in the lungs. How do we get the gas out of the lungs? Let that diaphragm relax, and the diaphragm will move superiorly. Relax those intercostals and the ribs drop, so the volume decreases. The lungs have some elastic recoil, so they push back in on their own, and that will increase the pulmonary pressure, and that will force gas out of the lungs. So what's going to affect the amount of air getting into the lungs? Pulmonary ventilation, so that's breathing, that's getting air in and out of the lungs. There's going to be three things. There's going to be airway resistance. There's going to be alveolar surface tension. There's going to be lung compliance. So first one, airway resistance. How big is the tube that the air is traveling into the lung? Is there anything blocking the tube carrying air into the lung? That's about the gist of that. If you get an asthma attack, what happens is you will get bronchoconstriction. So those bronchi themselves will have a layer of smooth muscle over them that can constrict and close down that airway and make it hard for air to travel into the lung. If you have mucus or some sort of infection or material, that stuff can also just be some sort of space occupying lesion just getting into the way of air getting into your lung. Our next one is alveolar surface tension. Our alveoli are like little balloons. We want them to blow up, okay? We want them to blow up. So if you take one of those itty bitty little balloons and you try to blow it up, sometimes you try to blow it up and your cheeks puff out. You can't blow up the balloon. So what do? You take it and you stretch it out a couple times and it warms it up, and now you blow up that balloon and it blows up easily. So if we want air to come into our lungs, we want these alveoli, which are like little balloons in there, which is going to be the actual place of where gas exchange is going to happen, to blow up easily. So we release this stuff called surfactant, which decreases the surface tension and increases the pliability of those alveoli to allow them to open up. So that is called surfactant. As we talked about in last lecture, the last cells in your body to mature before you are born are your type 2 alveolar cells. Those are the cells that release the surfactant. So when infants are born and they have a hard time breathing, the reason for that is because their type 2 alveolar cells, the surfactant producing cells, are not yet properly developed. So they get born, you give them a steroid injection, it increases the development of those cells. And then the last one is the lung compliance. You remember back here we said that your lungs have elastic recoil. So they're like balloons, they're large balloons. They can blow up and they can recoil. If they don't want to blow up, then that means they have poor compliance. If they want to blow up, they have good compliance. So the easier the lungs blow up, the easier you get air into the lungs, the better you will be able to breathe. Okay, here we're going to be talking about our respiratory volumes. When I look at this chart, I see volumes and I see capacities. Volumes I can measure, capacities I need to calculate. Volumes are measured, capacities are calculated. So, first ones are tidal volume. This is going to be the amount of air you breathe in and breathe out on a normal breath. So it's this description right here. It's usually about 500 mLs. Male and female are about the same. Next one is your inspiratory reserve volume, or IRV. This is the amount of air you can breathe in past your normal tidal volume inspiration. So if I take a breath in, how much air can I breathe in past that? That's my inspiratory reserve. On males, it is about 3,100 mLs, or 3.1 liters. On females, it's much less. Why? Their thoracic cavity is typically smaller. It's only going to be about 1,900. Expiratory reserve. The amount of air I can breathe out past my normal expiration on tidal volume. So I breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. I take my normal breath out, and how much air can I breathe out? I'm still exhaling right now. I have not reached my expiratory reserve yet. There we go. I reached it there. So expiratory reserve is the amount of air you can breathe out past your normal tidal volume. And then the last one's your residual volume. This is the amount of air left in the lungs after you have depleted your expiratory reserve. So if you've blown all of the air out of your lungs as much as you can, this is how much air is left. It's usually about 1,200 mLs in males and 1,100 in females. So that's pretty close. Next one's our total lung capacity. So total lung capacity is going to be all of these combined. It's how much air is in the lung when it is completely blown up at its fullest. So it's going to be your tidal volume plus your inspiratory reserve plus your expiratory reserve plus your residual volume. Vital capacity is how much air you can breathe in and breathe out on a maximum breath. So that's your tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve plus expiratory reserve. This should be at least 80% of your total lung capacity. If it's less, you likely have some sort of an issue, like you're a smoker or you have TB or you got some sort of COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Next one is inspiratory capacity, tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve. And the last one is your functional residual capacity. That's your expiratory reserve plus your residual volume. So here's just a chart, kind of lets you see each one. Here's your tidal volume, here's your inspiratory reserve. It's the amount of air past the tidal volume. Here's your expiratory reserve, the amount of air past your tidal volume again for expiration. And then your residual volume, how much air is left in the lung. Your total lung capacity shows right here. It's inspiratory plus tidal volume plus expiratory plus residual. The amount of air that is in the lung if you're completely filled up with air. Vital capacity is the amount of air you can breathe in and out on your deepest breath in and breath out. So it's expiratory plus tidal plus inspiratory reserve. Then you get inspiratory capacity, how much air I can breathe in completely. And expiratory capacity is the amount of air left in the lung after tidal volume. That's going to be expiratory reserve plus residual volume. So with our gases, we're going to want to know some stuff here. We got Dalton's law of partial pressure, and then we got Henry's law. With Dalton's law of partial pressure is the air around us is a mixture of a whole bunch of different types of gases. Altogether at atmospheric pressure, those gases are 760 millimeters of mercury. That is the pressure. But inside that air, we have oxygen, we have carbon dioxide, we have nitrogen, we have all these gases floating around in the air. Each one of those gases will have its own specific pressure. That will be a partial pressure. So I will add up all the different gases floating around in the air, and those will give me my total pressure. But each individual gas will have its partial pressure. With Henry's law, it says when a mixture of gas is in contact with a liquid, each gas will dissolve in proportion to its partial pressure. This is important for our blood. Why? Because we want the partial pressure of oxygen to be high enough in our air, in our atmospheric air that we're breathing in, so it can flow into the blood. Alright, so if we have a higher concentration of air, it's going to get into your blood easier. When people are having issues breathing, what do? You give them the oxygen tank, right? They're breathing in pure oxygen. So we increase that partial pressure of oxygen. The atmospheric pressure is still the same, 760. But all of a sudden, like 95% of that is, or 100% of it is going to be oxygen. So partial pressure, that's way up, and it's getting forced into the blood even harder. Okay, so on our next step of petty, pulmonary ventilation is what we just talked about. Now we're at external respiration. Okay, so with our external respiration, this is going to be the gas exchange in the lungs. There's going to be three things affecting the movement of the oxygen and carbon dioxide. First off is the partial pressure of the gases. Gases are going to move from high partial pressure to low partial pressure. So when I breathe air into my lungs, that partial pressure of oxygen of the air that is coming into my lungs is higher than that of the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood coming to my lungs. And vice versa for carbon dioxide. When I breathe in, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide coming into my lungs will be lower than that of the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in my blood. Why? We want to dump the carbon dioxide out into the lungs and take the oxygen from the lungs. Okay, next one is going to be matching of alveolar ventilation and pulmonary blood perfusion. If I'm working out and I'm exercising and my heart rate goes up, I start to breathe heavier. Why? I'm huffing and puffing, I'm getting more oxygen into my lungs. There's no point in me getting more oxygen into my lungs if I'm not bringing more blood in there to pick up the oxygen. So I get more blood flowing through there, I get more oxygen, we could get everything happening faster. So ventilation will be the amount of gas getting to the alveoli, and the perfusion will be the amount of blood actually going through those capillary beds. There will be auto-regulation going on, and it will be some sort of control between our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic is, that's fight or flight. So you hear a loud noise like that, all of a sudden it startles you. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate increases, you take a deep breath. So when the heart rate increases, like I said, you breathe heavier. You have more oxygen coming, the blood's flowing faster. We want to be able to get that stuff everywhere quickly. Parasympathetic, rest and digest. You ate turkey dinner, you had some beers, you're on the couch, you're relaxing. Your heart rate's down, you're just bleh. You don't have to breathe heavy, your heart rate doesn't have to be high. And then the last one, we got our structural characteristics, the respiratory membrane. So how far of an area do my gases have to pass to get from the lung into the blood, or from the blood back to the lung? We want that to be the thinnest amount of area possible. Let me pull up last lecture. Let me come over here and find this. Let's show you our respiratory membrane. You remember we talked about this last time? So here's our respiratory membrane. Here's our alveolus. Okay, here's my blood vessel. So my respiratory membrane was one cell layer from my alveolus, my my fused basement membrane and one cell layer from the endothelium of my capillary bed. Let's say you get something going on and you get RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and this syncytium, or this basement membrane, gets inflamed. All of a sudden this doubles in length, or in width. Can you see how it would be hard to breathe and you'd feel tired? But if you have high oxygen concentration, you give somebody 100% oxygen to breathe, and all of a sudden this oxygen is getting forced in there much harder. Okay, back to where we were. Next one, internal respiration. Here's petty. I finally wrote it on the slide, huh? So pulmonary ventilation, external respiration, transportation of gas, internal respiration. So we're at our transportation of gas. Now we've carried our blood to our tissues, and we want to drop off oxygen at the tissues, and we want to pick up carbon dioxide. So this will be capillary exchange in the body tissues. Partial pressure and diffusion gradients are the exact opposite of what they were in external respiration. So here, let's check out this chart here. This is my lung. When I bring air into the lung from the outside world, partial pressure of oxygen is going to be 104. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide is going to be 40. 104 is a relatively high number for partial pressure of oxygen. 40 is a relatively low number for partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So that stuff gets forced, so the blood coming into the alveoli will have a partial pressure of oxygen of 40 and a partial pressure of carbon dioxide of 45. What does that mean? Oxygen pressure is low, so we're going to go from high pressure to low pressure. Oxygen is going to get forced into the blood. Carbon dioxide pressure is high in the blood here, so carbon dioxide is going to get forced out of the blood. So we push the carbon dioxide out from 45 to 40, and we push the oxygen in from the 104 into the 40. So when we come out, now the partial pressure of oxygen in my atrial blood, or my oxygenated blood, will be 104 millimeters of mercury, and my partial pressure carbon dioxide will be 40. Bring that blood to the lungs, bring that blood to the heart, out of the heart, out to the tissues. Partial pressure of oxygen as it's getting into the capillary beds of those tissues is like 100. Partial pressure of oxygen in my tissues is less than 40. So that means I can dump off the oxygen. We go from high pressure to low pressure. High pressure is in the blood, low pressure is in the tissue. Oxygen goes to the tissue. Tissue has high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, so that gets dumped off into the blood because partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood is only 40. Blood leaves the capillary bed. We're down to 40, the partial pressure of oxygen being 40, partial pressure of carbon dioxide being 45. We go back to the heart and we start this whole process over again. So let's talk about our transportation of gases in the blood. Here we're going to specifically talk about the transportation of oxygen in the blood. Most all of the oxygen traveling through your blood will be bound to hemoglobin. 98.5% of the oxygen in your blood will be bound to hemoglobin. 1.5% about is going to be just dissolved in the plasma. Hemoglobin that is oxygenated is referred to as oxyhemoglobin. So when hemoglobin has lots of oxygen on it and it's got all of its oxygen, it's called oxyhemoglobin. After it starts to release oxygen, it's called deoxyhemoglobin. If my hemoglobin releases all of its oxygen, it starts to pick up carbon dioxide. We call it carbaminohemoglobin. That will come up in a later slide. I'll point it out again. So with hemoglobin, when we have it coming through the blood, let's say it has no oxygen on it, when it gets its first molecule of oxygen, it slightly changes its shape and it makes it like oxygen more. Once it gets a second oxygen, it really wants a third one. Once it gets the third one, it is aggressively seeking out its fourth oxygen. So the gist of what happens is the more oxygen the hemoglobin gets, the more it wants. It tops out at 4 oxygen. With the rate that our oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin, it is going to be dependent on a couple things. Partial pressure of oxygen, the temperature of your blood, the pH of your blood, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and a couple other things. But the big ones and the important ones I want you guys to know are these top four here. This one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay, now we got a couple other things here we want to talk about. There's something called the Bohr effect and the Haldane effect. Bohr effect states declining pH and increased partial pressure of oxygen will weaken hemoglobin's bond to oxygen. Kind of makes sense. We just said the more oxygen there is, the more hemoglobin wants it. So if there's less oxygen, that means the less the hemoglobin will want it. So if we have increased CO2 and a declining pH, or we're getting acidic, that's bad, because we're not going to be able to carry oxygen efficiently to our tissues. With Haldane effect, it says lower partial pressure of oxygen and lower extent of hemoglobin saturation with oxygen. Okay, that means that we can carry more CO2 in the blood. I think of it this way: your blood is like a delivery truck. It can be filled up with some oxygen, some carbon dioxide. When it comes into your tissues, it's filled up with oxygen. When it's entering the tissue into a capillary bed to drop off oxygen, it's filled up with oxygen. It can't pick up the carbon dioxide until after it dumps off the oxygen. So it dumps off its carbon dioxide, now the truck's empty, now it can pick up the, it dumps off the oxygen, now the truck's empty, now it can pick up the carbon dioxide, bring it to the lungs, and do the opposite. Okay, dump off the carbon dioxide in the lungs, empty out the truck, fill it up with oxygen, go back to the tissues and start over. Their last little definition here is hypoxia. All hypoxia is when you have poor or inadequate oxygen delivery to a specific tissue. So here we go with body temperature. Is your body temperature decreases, your hemoglobin carries oxygen better. As body temperature increases, your body carries your hemoglobin carries oxygen worse, or it's not as effective. Think back to the immunity chapter. We said that your body gets a fever as a defense mechanism against those weak bacterial cells. Body temperature rises, hemoglobin changes its shape, you don't carry as much oxygen, you are tired, that's how you feel. Those bacterial cells, they're severely weakened, and now your body can kill them. Okay, here's pH. Okay, next one, transport of carbon dioxide in the blood. Some of it's going to be dissolved in plasma, 7 to 10%. About 20% of it will attach to hemoglobin. Here's that carbaminohemoglobin right here. And then the rest of it is going to be in this bicarbonate. Okay. There's this thing called the bicarbonate buffer system. It is this right here. We are going to go in depth in the acid-base chapter with this bicarbonate buffer system. The gist of what it says is that if my carbon dioxide levels are high, it can meet up with water. They turn into this stuff called carbonic acid, and then that splits off into bicarbonate, which is this HCO3, and H+ ions. So this is where we will be storing that carbon dioxide. Okay. Our bicarbonate is alkaline. Okay. And then we have this stuff, this carbonic anhydrase enzyme. What that's going to do is that's going to help make this carbon dioxide and water into this carbonic acid, which splits into this. Like I said, don't worry too much about this right now. We're going to talk a lot about this in the acid-base chapter. Okay, let's go back to the hemoglobin. So we said about 20% of the carbon dioxide can be bound to hemoglobin. We call that carbaminohemoglobin. That is hemoglobin combined with carbon dioxide. This happens when deoxygenated hemoglobin combines with carbon dioxide. Only deoxygenated hemoglobin will combine with it. It will not combine with carbon dioxide if it has oxygen on it. Okay, and once again, the Haldane effect. the lower the partial pressure of oxygen and the lower extent of hemoglobin saturation will cause O2, and it will cause more carbon dioxide to be carried in the blood. So here, it's just showing if you have like changes in temperature or changes in pH or stuff like that, hemoglobin can change its shape from normal, good oxygen carrying hemoglobin to funky shape that doesn't carry oxygen as well. This is just showing kind of like, here would be the optimum pH for carrying hemoglobin carrying oxygen. We want it about here, and it's going to be happy. It's going to carry its most oxygen. Okay. This is a page from your study guide. So we're talking about neural mechanisms for respiration. First off, we're going to have our medullary respiratory centers. Okay, so we have our medullary respiratory centers. We get a dorsal group and we get a ventral group. Okay, our dorsal group is in back, ventral group is in front. Dorsal group is going to be your inspiratory center, and it will tell you how fast you should be breathing. Your ventral group makes sure that you have a smooth rhythm. So if you get like that choppy, you're crying and you're breathing funky, your ventral respiratory group is not working very well at that moment. It's not having a nice, smooth, fluid breathing pattern. And then the last one is going to be the pontine respiratory group. Big thing from the pontine respiratory group is it is going to protect your lungs from overinflating. There are little stretch receptors in there, and if the lungs start to overinflate, they send up to your pontine respiratory center and tell you, hey, breathe out. Don't let your lungs explode. Okay? So let's check out this chart here. So we got our higher brain centers. You can control your breathing. I can stop breathing right now for a little bit if I want, or I can breathe heavy if I want, right? We get emotional ones, right? I said you're crying and you're this and that and you're not breathing right and it's all choppy and you're breathing heavy. We have our peripheral chemoreceptors. So let's check these out now. So if we have decreased oxygen, increased carbon dioxide, and increased H+, what's that going to tell us to do? It's going to tell us to breathe more. For our central chemoreceptors, those will sense our carbon dioxide and H+. Once again, those will tell us to breathe more. And if your receptors in your muscles, your proprioceptors, are seeing lots of movement, they're going to say, hey, we're going to need more oxygen. Start breathing more. Stretch receptors in the lungs, if they are overinflating, that tells you to exhale. Or if there's an irritant, you remember the name of this right here? Where this little V shape of cartilage, where the trachea splits into the right and left main bronchus, that's the carina. It causes a strong cough reflex. Violent coughing to prevent whatever it is from getting into your main bronchi and blocking your lungs. Hopefully you will spit it out, is what it wants to do. Something I should point out here, I don't know if I'll have the chance later, is carbon dioxide shows up in both of these. Carbon dioxide levels will be the main determinant factor in getting you to breathe. If you need to breathe, your body's really sensing the carbon dioxide levels more than it's sensing the oxygen levels. Which I said right here on this next slide, huh? Increased carbon dioxide, most important, increase rate and depth of breathing. So our chemical factors that will influence our rate and depth of breathing are carbon dioxide, oxygen, and hydrogen ion concentration. Carbon dioxide is the most important. If you have large drops in oxygen levels, your body does get nervous, but the thing that bothers it more is those carbon dioxide levels. Okay, so let's say you get increased arterial pressure of carbon dioxide. That means that you're going to have a decreased pH in cerebral spinal fluid and in your blood, and your brain is going to get agitated. Your medullary respiratory centers tell your respiratory muscles time to breathe. You breathe, you inspire oxygen, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and pH will return to normal. This is also saying our peripheral chemoreceptors and our central chemoreceptors will pick up on the same thing and go through the same steps. Medullary respiratory centers, time to breathe. You breathe, you get rid of that carbon dioxide, bring in the oxygen, we return these to normal. Oops. I need to go back, sorry. Let me click here. So our last factors that will influence breathing are our higher brain centers. So limbic system, emotional stuff. If you get upset about something, that affects your rate of breathing, right? If I just told you all, I don't care how you feel today, I'm failing you all, I guarantee you there's going to be at least 5 girls in this class that are going to start bawling, crying right now. And they're going to breathe uncontrollably, and they're going to be sniffling, and they'll be all over the place. That's limbic center, strong emotions. So you won't be able to have good control over your breathing. Other one, cerebral cortex, voluntary control. Everybody in this classroom can hold their breath for a couple seconds if I ask them to, right? Okay. Other ones, you can get a pulmonary irritant. So if you breathe something in, it can make you cough. Or if you breathe something into your nose and it's funky and it gives you a funny feeling in your nose, it can make you sneeze, right? And the last ones are hearing Brower reflex. The gist of it is that's there to protect your lungs from overinflating. That's it.